With Sledgehammer, Peter Gabriel took a 60s soul style and, well, Peter Gabrielized it, creating a massive 80s pop hit in the process. With his 1986 song, Sledgehammer, Peter Gabriel was no longer just a cool cult musician, he became an international pop superstar. Today we're going to dive deep into this Sledgehammer, the incredible sounds in it, and see how the song changed music. Hello there, it's Warren Hewitt. Hope you're doing marvelously well. Welcome back to another episode of Songs That Change Music. If you haven't already, please subscribe. And if you hit that notification bell, you'll be notified when we have a new video. And of course, you can go to producelikeapro.com and sign up for the email list and get a whole bunch of free goodies. Peter Gabriel has never been one to play by the conventional rules. In 1975, he became disillusioned with the music industry and left his band Genesis. In 1977, he released his first solo album, simply titled Peter Gabriel, followed by 1978's release of a brand new album, also self-titled. In fact, his first 4 solo albums are all self-titled, although his fans have given them unofficial nicknames. His sound has always been distinctly Peter Gabriel. With his first 4 solo albums, he experimented with so many different sounds and musical elements, and he had a huge cult following. And he also managed to have some chart hits like Salisbury Hill, which peaks at number 7 in the UK and number 38 in the US. His third album, unofficially titled Melt, is credited as the first to use gated reverb on the snare drum, which became one of the biggest sounds of the 80s. He was the first person in the UK to own a FAIRLIGHT CMI Series 1 synthesizer, using it all over his third album. On his fourth self-titled album, unofficially called Security, he took on a greater production role, and he incorporated synthesizers and world percussion. This album included the song Shock the Monkey, which became his first song to peak in the US Top 40, peaking at number 29. Then, it's as if Peter Gabriel decided he would play the game, but he was going to play it his way. After taking a break to work on the soundtrack for the film Birdie, he set out to record what would become the biggest album of his career, 1986's So, which featured his first and only #1 Billboard song, Sledgehammer. Now let's take apart this incredible song, starting with the low end. The incredible thing about Tony Levin's bass line in this song is that it's an amazing line on its own, but then the tone of it just takes it over the top. It's poppy, it's hooky, it's soulful, it's funky, and it stays in your head long after you hear it. And the tone makes you wonder how they got that sound. Tonally, a fretless bass with flat wound strings sounds a little bit more like an upright bass. It's a warmer tone, and the fretless fingerboard allows for a smooth slide between notes. But this smooth, upright-esque tone is mixed with a pick, which gives you a much harder attack. As if that wasn't enough, the octave pedal makes it sound so much thicker and almost like a synthesizer. There's also a chorus effect on his bass with a high-pass filter on the send into the chorus. The effect here is powerful. The low end is so rich, and the higher end just shimmers. And it's all being played by the legendary Tony Levin, who just makes the whole thing feel so good. You've got a great player, plus you've got a little bit of old school upright bass sound, a little bit of modern synth and picking sound, and the result is just incredible. So let's take a listen to the isolated bass on this track to hear these elements mixed together for this bass tone. To help break down this amazing bass line, I'm going to throw in my friend, the fretless monster himself, the legendary Mr. Tony Franklin. You will probably know him from playing in The Firm with Jimmy Page and Paul Rodgers.
So, listening to Sledgehammer, I originally thought that there were multi-tracked basses in there, like a regular range and then the octave part and even maybe a piccolo bass and all sorts of things. But when you listen to it very closely, there's no way that it could have been multi-tracked because You hear a lot of the slides and you start double tracking that on a fretless bass, you're going to get some chorusing, you're going to get some rub between them, and there's no way, it's so tight. So he used the octave pedal, the Boss OC2, the brown little box, which I have. I had one since the 80s. I got it in 84, and I used it both live and in the studio with the Firm and Blue Murder. It has a big, rich, analog, fat sound, and it tracks very well. But what's interesting in the construction of this bass line is that Tony Levin stays within a certain register. You start getting low. It gets wobbly, it doesn't track so well, but if you keep it within a certain register, and if you keep the notes shorter, certain notes you can get away with ringing longer, but it's limited. Higher up is better, of course, and there's a lot of nice high action on this. But anyway, he recorded it on the Music Man bass. I don't have one of those, but using this, my fretless precision bass, in the middle pickup, and I actually have the tone control wide open. But it's a fascinating part, and before I'm going to play it, but before people write into me and say, hey, that's not right, I'm really doing it as an approximation, more for the approach and for the sound. And he used a pick. I'm using a Herco Silver pick. My favorite's got a lot of flexibility and grip. And the overall feel for the bass is a swing feel. It's got a nice swing to it, which to me really makes it. And it's a very Motown kind of feel with that. So here we go. That's essentially the verse pattern, a few little variations, and that quirky fill as well. You know, we all have our idiosyncrasies and stylings as musicians and bassists, and especially on the fretless bass, I find. There are little things that we all do. Excuse me, that suit our personality, our fingers, and just the overall stylistic way that we play. And so that little quirky little, I don't exactly know what it is. And even if you hear it isolated, it's hard to tell what it is. It's something, it's just one of Tony's quirks. There's actually like 5 notes in the space of 4. So it's a very interesting fill. But anyway, that is my take on it. And yeah, I think there's a lot of tweaking, obviously, that went on in the mix of that song. But what an iconic part that, to me, made the song. So nice job, Mr. Levin.
Peter Gabriel has said that the biggest influence in this song is 60s soul music, and those elements are definitely there. They're just updated for a more 80s sound. The active bass line, very common in soul music, is updated with a bass tone we just discussed. The drums, played by drummer Manu Katché, mixes in a tambourine and almost sound like they could be from Stevie Wonder's song Superstition, but with an 80s gated reverb snare mixed in. The guitars, played by David Rhodes and producer Daniel Lanois, are simple and straightforward. They're funky lines that stay simple so that the bass can move around, another staple of soul music. These are run through a Roland JC120 and a Fender Deluxe, and both were mic'd with Shure SM57s. And then you get to the horn section. Peter Gabriel credits Otis Redding and many other great soul artists from Stax Records as a big influence on this song. And the horn section on Sledgehammer features Wayne Jackson, the trumpet player for the Memphis Horns. He'd already recorded plenty of Stax Records songs and even toured with Otis Redding. Wayne is incredible. Also in the horn section was Mark Rivera on tenor sax, Don Mickelson on trombone, and just like with the drums and bass, the horns are a classic soul element. They have a bit of an update for the 80s. As Kevin Killen, one of the engineers on this song, explained, producer Daniel Lanois combined elements and sounds to create something new. During recording, Dan really liked the idea of combining instruments to create a new part. So, it wasn't unusual to have Dan playing a 12-string electric guitar, David Rhodes playing his Steinberger 6-string guitar or Strat, and Peter playing the CP70, Fairlight, or Prophet 5. Instead of their instruments being recorded to 3 discrete tracks, all of them were treated as a single sound source and recorded to a mono or stereo track to create a sound illusion or part. This approach can be heard with a horn section when you solo them with the synth track, a Prophet 5 played by Peter. Though they do play separate parts, at times they're playing the same part, combining them to make a brand new sound. Peter also plays piano to help thicken things up. This also grounds it back into soul music. But there are 2 other elements in here that are distinctly Peter Gabriel. One is the flute sound that you hear in the intro and briefly near the end. This is a synthesized Japanese shakuhachi flute, generated with an EMU Emulator 2 sampler and played on Peter's Fairlight. And then there's the vocoder that shows up briefly near the end, just to sing the word sledgehammer. Sledgehammer. This mix of old sounds with modern digital tweaks is truly incredible. It's all run through a 56-input SSL 4000E from a Studer A80 24-track machine and then mixed back to a Studer A80 that had been modified to include Colin Broad audio cards. They had a variety of outboard gear like an EMT echo plate, an AMS 1580 digital delay, but they also used the live room as an echo chamber, putting a PA and Neumann U87s in the live room. The sound of the instruments on this song is, of course, incredible, but we haven't even talked about the icing on the cake. This album was recorded at Ashcombe House in Somerset. Peter Gabriel converted the barn house into a recording studio because, as he explains, it was much cheaper than using a conventional studio.
You recorded the album down here in the country in Bath. I wonder why you did that.
Money.
Sensible.
Because at the speed that I work to make an album in anyone else's studio would bankrupt me before I got to the 3rd song, I think. So it's ended up a lot more economical just trying to use the record advances to buy the equipment. And that gives me the freedom when, say, the soundtrack thing comes along or whatever else, that I can experiment and explore things without having to watch the clock all the time.
The thing is, there was no line of sight between the control room and the main studio room. So while the instruments were recorded in a live room, overdubs, including the vocal, were recorded in the control room. As engineer Kevin Killen explained, we had small NS10 monitors and a pair of tannoys as well. So we'd flip the phase on them, placing the U47 at the apex position from the speakers while monitoring at a moderate level. And then Peter would sing with a pair of Sennheisers around his neck. Afterwards, I'd record a track at the same monitoring level of just the backing track minus the vocal. I then combine that with the backing track out of phase with the vocal to see if we could get it to cancel. If you solo Peter Gabriel's vocal, you can actually hear the backing tracks playing in the background as he's singing.
Well, the fruit is as sweet as can be. I wanna be your sledgehammer. Why don't you call my name? You better call the Sledgehammer.
Sledgehammer went on to win 3 Grammys, one of which was for Best Male Rock Vocal Performance. And it's easy to see why. This incredible vocal performance is complemented by P.P. Arnold, Coral Lewis, and Dee Gordon.
Kick the habit, shed my skin. This is the new stuff. We go dancing in.
Sledgehammer features an extended outro, making the song over 5 minutes long, which is highly unusual for a pop song. According to producer Daniel Lanois, the outro wasn't planned, but that the band busted into a long jam once the planned arrangement had run its course. Peter conjured up the most incredible spontaneous vocal ad-libs, some of it non-lyrical or nonsensical, pure fun, jumped up and dance lines. Sledgehammer was produced by Peter Gabriel and Daniel Lanois, and engineered by David Bascom and Kevin Killett, who took over for David when he left to work for Tears for Fears. Peter Gabriel is notorious for changing lyrics and phrases during the recording process. He constantly tweaks it to get the song where he wants it to be. This means overdubs, slight arrangement changes, or cutting out parts altogether. Rehearsals for this album began in May of 1985, and the album was mastered in February of 1986 by Ian Cooper at London's Townhouse Studios. Everything changed for Peter Gabriel when Sledgehammer was released on April 21st, 1986. The song reached #1 in the US and Canada, #4 in the UK, won 3 Grammys and 9 MTV Video Music Awards. The music video really helped get the song to a much wider audience, because you have to remember, in 1986, there was no Spotify or YouTube. MTV was huge for getting your music out there to the masses. The album So was released on May 19th in 1986 and is still Peter Gabriel's best-selling solo album. It's been certified 5 times platinum by the RIAA and is listed at 187 in Rolling Stone's greatest albums of all time. Peter Gabriel has gone on to release many more albums, collaborating with and influencing so many other artists along the way. In 2014, he was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Sledgehammer transformed Peter Gabriel from rocker with a cult following to pop rock superstar. It's almost as though Peter Gabriel had been refusing to play the pop game for years, and once he finally decided to go all in and do a proper pop song, he exploded. So was his first solo album that wasn't self-titled, and it even featured a picture of him on the front cover. Sledgehammer is definitely pop, but it's also distinctly Peter Gabriel. But interestingly, this song almost didn't make it on the album. As Peter explained, with Sledgehammer, everyone thinks, oh, he must have created that to get a hit. And it wasn't done that way. In fact, Tony Levin reminded me that he was packing his bags to go home, and I called him back into the studio saying, I've got this one idea that maybe we can fool around with for the next record, but I like the feel. And that was Sledgehammer. It was late in the day, and we just fell into this groove. Landed a beautiful drum track on it and a great bass line, and it all came together. With Sledgehammer, Peter Gabriel took a 60s soul style and, well, Peter Gabrielized it, creating a massive 80s pop hit in the process. This incredible mix of old and new, analog and digital, from the bass to the drums to the horns to the soulful backing vocals, all combined to be an incredible song that is quintessentially 80s and yet still incredibly timeless and classic. So thanks ever so much for watching. Please hit the subscribe button, leave me some comments below. Love to know what else you want to see in the series. And of course, check out all the other videos in this series. Have a marvelous time. Thank you. So long, farewell, auf Wiedersehen, au revoir.